From ELCA Advocacy, this is Here I Pod. There's so much happening in our communities every week and every day that are impacted by policies at the local, state, and federal levels. Here I Pod will focus on one aspect of what's happening each episode by talking with faith-based advocates, as well as providing steps that you can take in your own advocacy efforts. In episode 9, our host, Regina Banks, speaks to Sasha Ghosh-Siminoff, Program Director for Middle East and North Africa in the ELCA's Witness in Society office. This is a wide-ranging conversation, and they discuss many aspects of the ELCA's relationship with local church bodies in the Holy Land and in other parts of the region. They also discuss many current events, including the ongoing war in Gaza and its impact on the populations there. They also discuss historical elements of how the ELCA engages in the region, including the framework of accompaniment, which Joey will elaborate on in our history segment. Finally, we'll also hear a story from a Palestinian Christian and ELCJHL young adult. Here's Regina to get us started.
Good morning. This morning we have with us Sasha Ghosh-Siminoff, Program Director for Middle East North Africa Policy for the ELCA. Good morning or good afternoon to you, Sasha.
Good morning, Regina. Thank you for having me today.
Wonderful to have you here. I'm going to note for the recording, since we are going to have a conversation about an area of the world that is dynamic and things are changing all the time. Just note that it is May 12th, and for here in Sacramento, it's 9:00 in the morning. So fluid and dynamic things are happening on the ground. So just wanted to note that for the record. But from your perspective, what are the ELCA's most urgent concerns when it comes to U.S. policy in the Middle East and North Africa?
Sure. Thank you. I think number one, obviously, the Middle East North Africa region is quite large, quite diverse, and quite complex, as you noted. That being said, the ELCA has a very distinct and specific relationship with the Christian Palestinian community, both because the ELCA has a companion church in Palestine, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Jordan in the Holy Land, has had a long-running relationship also through the Lutheran World Federation with the Augusta Victoria Hospital, which is based in East Jerusalem, and it's run by the LWF, and we have in the past supported the hospital quite directly. And quite a bit of the policy priorities and work that we are doing here in the Witness in Society office is to provide, to request and to advocate for both the Augusta Victoria Hospital and the wider East Jerusalem Hospital Network, but also, more broadly speaking, a path towards peace in the Holy Land in concert and with the voices of our companion church on the ground, providing us insight as to how we can go about doing advocacy that most accurately reflects the local community.
Okay, so that sounded like two separate but related issues, which is the hospital concerns, the humanitarian concerns, and then the peacemaking concerns. So maybe we can take the humanitarian and hospital concerns first. What can you tell us about a little bit about Augusta Victoria Hospital and what that means for the people on the ground there, and what it is that we are advocating for when we talk to the administration and Congress on behalf of Augusta Victoria?
So the Augusta Victoria Hospital is a Lutheran-run hospital that has been around for better part of 80, 90 years at this point, in some form or another, providing critical healthcare support to the Palestinian community, irrespective of faith. So like any hospital, whoever walks through that door will receive care. This hospital is in East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem is, in theory, supposed to be part of and the capital of any future Palestinian state. And that is an agreement, a basic agreement that most international community players and states participated and agreed upon that process in the 90s during the Oslo Peace Accords. And so because of that, the hospital plays a very pivotal role in providing healthcare for Palestinians, not just in Jerusalem, but also in the West Bank and Gaza. And so before the current round of hostilities ensued, you would have Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank getting referral to go to the East Jerusalem Hospital Network, which is the wider hospital network that the Augusta Victoria Hospital is part of, in order to receive specialized care. So in the case of Augusta Victoria Hospital, that would be cancer care, especially.
And so when you are sharing that story with the administration and with Congress, are they aware of our participation in that way? And are they supportive? Or I assume we're asking for, what are we asking for?
Absolutely. So there's been bipartisan support for the Augusta Victoria Hospital and the wider East Jerusalem Hospital Network for the past 15 years in some shape or form. That is usually in financial assistance, and that financial assistance has been provided to the East Jerusalem Hospital Network and by default then to the Augusta Victoria Hospital. Some of it has been capacity building, some of it, for training for healthcare workers. Some of it has been allowing for the provision of new equipment or expansion of programs that are providing care directly in the West Bank and Gaza. And some of it has been, just to provide support for the administrative running of the hospital system, which is very expensive. So that has been a provision that, again, has had bipartisan support for the last 15 years. And under the previous administration, there was a pledge of $100 million to the hospital system that basically ran from 2022 to the end of 2024. And what we're currently asking is that Congress and then eventually the White House continue that support for the hospital due to the critical nature of the care provided, but also, again, as an anchor, a critical core service anchor for Palestinian community that helps, frankly, with stability in the region in the Holy Land.
Thank you for that context. And what has been the response that you've gotten from Congress and from the administration?
Sure. From Congress, there's been good response so far. I think there is interest in finding a way forward in terms of providing financial assistance to the hospital system. I would say that when it comes to the current administration, we are waiting to see what the reorganization of the State Department and USAID looks like in order to determine how potential funding from Congress would actually flow from the US government to the hospital. In the past, that money went through USAID. Given USAID's current status, it is unclear what the pathway would be. And now that we just in the last month had an announcement by Secretary of State Rubio that there would be the reorganization of parts of the State Department, we're essentially needing to wait to understand what would be the potential pathway, because we need to work with Congress to say money needs to be allocated here in this place for this bureau so that we know exactly how that money would move to the hospital.
When we had a conversation with Patricia Casare, she mentioned USAID and our commitment to programs that are affected by USAID. Would it be a benefit for USAID to be reinstituted, or are you looking for there to be a whole other pathway?
Baseline, it would be better for USAID to be reinstituted for a whole host of reasons. First of all, USAID has 60 years of experience moving money and support into conflict spaces. This is literally what they do. And they know how to do it, and they know all the monitoring and oversight mechanisms required to ensure that there's compliance and transparency regarding how funding is being provided. And they have the physical know-how, logistics, and infrastructure to do it in a way that the State Department, frankly, has not really been involved on that level with that amount of money in decades. So to recreate that pathway through the bureaucracy within the legal bounds of both what Congress and the executive branch can and should be doing is a lengthy process. And obviously the situation on the ground in the Holy Land is extremely critical. And our preference would be to use the system that we have now rather than reinventing the wheel, so to speak.
Okay, switching gears just a little bit to the peacekeeping and peacemaking. How do you see the ELCA's commitment to accompaniment and global solidarity showing up in the MENA context right now?
Absolutely. So we're involved in a couple ways. One, we are a board member and a supporter of Churches for Middle East Peace, which is a coalition of ecumenical partners who are working for and finding pathways to support peace efforts in the region. And as a result, we're actively engaged. In my current position within the LCA, I am the representative of the LCA to the Churches for Middle East Peace Board. And through that, we work to try and build coalitions to support good policies that will support peace in the region, but also to find, what are the best pathways for engagement within an ecumenical setting regarding the situation of the Christian community in the Holy Land. And the Christian community in the Holy Land is Palestinian. So recognizing that and having that broader conversation within sort of the domestic discourse about the situation in the Holy Land is also really critical in order to push domestic opinion in a direction that aligns with realities on the ground.
You answered that question too well. It got to 3 or 4 other questions that I had. What are some other examples of ways that we're engaged in the region?
Sure. As example, our colleagues at the ELCJHL, our companion church, are very active in advocacy. And one of our commitments to them is to find ways in partnership with the LCA Sumud program, our accompaniment program, to bring them here to the United States in order to engage with Congress and the White House and speak directly as the local voices on the ground as to exactly what is happening. What are the needs and priorities of the Palestinian Christian community and the wider Palestinian community? And what are the pressures that they face on a daily basis in their lives? And what does that look like? So that when we're talking with Congress about what needs to be done, it's not just us saying what we think as the LCA here in the United States, but what we are hearing from our community partners on the ground whose voices should be prioritized in this discussion.
Do we have partners on the Israeli side? Are we having those same kinds of conversations?
I would say that our engagement with the Israeli side is complicated. Our colleagues on the ground do a lot of that work and a lot of that engagement. Domestically here, we have a number of sort of interfaith initiatives throughout the LCA that engages with, for example, the Jewish American community and the Muslim American community about this issue. And so some of our engagement flows more domestically to this issue. But in terms of engagement on the ground in the Holy Land, we often rely on our partners on the ground to tell us how and what that engagement should look like so that we are mindful of their relationships and how they need to maneuver in terms of their daily lives.
Does the ELCA take a position on military aid to the region?
We have taken a position as of late that it is not conducive to supporting the peace process for the U.S. government to continue supporting unfettered military support to the Israeli government under the current conditions as they stand. So in the past, we have joined letters with other coalitions point in support of the joint resolutions of disapproval, which have been going through the Senate, which has pushed for the United States government to use current laws on the books, whether that's the Foreign Assistance Act or the Leahy Law, to determine whether the Israeli government is in line with our laws regarding human rights violations to allow us to continue providing military assistance. And from numerous sources and reviews that have occurred both in the previous administration and in the current administration, it is pretty clear that in many respects, the Israeli government is not in line with our own laws here in the United States, and therefore it does not make sense to continue providing military support and aid to the Israeli state under the current conditions.
What are the biggest opportunities or biggest risks you see currently in the MENA region for the ELCA?
Obviously, when we engage in any sort of advocacy vis-a-vis the topic of the Holy Land and Israel-Palestine, that has become a trigger issue here in the United States domestically. I would say that I have not seen that there is full consensus within the LCA itself regarding this issue. There's a lot of opinions and there's a lot of relationships, both domestically and internationally, with the various communities that exist in the Holy Land. So part of the risk is just about engaging with as many segments of the LCA as possible to understand where everyone is at and how we can advocate for a policy and a way forward that's both in line with the LCA's social teachings and theology, while simultaneously respecting and understanding that people have difference of opinion about this issue and have different relationships, both domestically and abroad, that impact how they see this conflict and how they see the responsibilities of the various parties of this conflict moving forward. So I'd say that's one. And I'd say the other thing is that, frankly, again, the current administration has taken a very hard line about legitimate free speech and criticism of the Israeli state through through attaching criticism of the Israeli state to the concept that any criticism of the Israeli state would be considered anti-Semitism. And so that makes it a lot harder to have holistic discussions about where we as a church see that the US government policies don't align with our values and just don't make sense as good policy without edging into that territory. Simultaneously, we want to be able to engage with the current administration to have those hard discussions because we think it's important. So we're trying to find a way to have those discussions while being true, again, the social teachings and theology of the ELCA itself simultaneously.
Sasha, I would like your help on how to formulate this question, because Christians operating in the region always run into the possibility of that anti-Semitism question. And Lutherans in particular have to, at this stage of history, be cognizant of that anti-Semitic label when advocating in a way that is not exactly in complete agreement with the Israeli state. I want to ask a question about how that is being navigated in the ELCA, but I'm not trying to be provocative. I just want to ask a question.
I think it's important to first have the conversation about disentangling the Israeli state and the Israeli state's policies from Judaism as a religion and as a community. I mean, obviously, from the Israeli state's standpoint, they consider themselves the Jewish state, and that they consider themselves a representative of the Jewish people. But if you speak with the Jewish community, there's intense disagreement and there is not consensus about where the line between the Israeli state begins and ends vis-a-vis the Jewish community. And there's a lot of Jewish Americans and Israeli Jews who currently are opposed to the Israeli state's policies vis-a-vis Gaza and the war in Gaza and the ongoing occupation of the West Bank. So I think one is to first understand that anti-Semitism, especially how it's perceived domestically, needs in some ways to be disentangled from a discussion about Israel and its policies in the Holy Land. Anti-Semitism is a very real, very, very serious threat here in the United States. It has been on the rise since 2016, and that has to do in many ways with a lot of domestic political factors, irrespective of what's happening in the Holy Land. And we need to be cognizant of that. Now, has some of that increased as a result of the October 7th, 2023 attacks? Yes. But that's like a conversation we need to have head on. And we need to talk with our interfaith partners about how we can have that conversation in an honest manner, being aware that maybe we're not always going to agree with our interfaith partners about everything, but we have to have the ability to have that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for that. If you could ask every ELCA congregation to take one step this year toward deeper engagement with MENA and justice in the region, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I would love for everyone to join the listserv for the Sumud program and understand what the Sumud program is doing and how it's working on accompaniment with our ELCJHL partners in the region. And more importantly, using Sumud as a resource to educate themselves about some of the nuances of this conflict that they may not have necessarily come across in their day-to-day lives or through their engagement on this issue. Additionally, just to diversify news sources. I think oftentimes right now in the United States, we end up in an echo chamber and we're hearing from people who we agree with, and that's fine and great. But there's quite a lot of diversity of opinion and sourcing regarding the Middle East. And most of my career has been working in the Middle East. And I always say, when you read one news source, you're reading 20% about what's actually happening, and you got to find the other 80% from other news sources and other voices that will give you the full picture. And it's best to reserve judgment about anything going on in the Middle East until you get that full picture, so you can make an informed decision about what to believe and how to engage moving forward.
What's the biggest story we're not hearing?
I think the biggest story that we're not hearing is what's going on in Syria since the fall of the Assad regime on December 8th, 2024. There's been immense changes on the ground in Syria with the new transitional government. Through our engagement with the World Council of Churches and the Middle East Council of Churches, we have relationships with the Christian religious minority in Syria. They're in a really complicated place, as are other religious minorities in Syria. And Syria borders so many key countries in the Middle East that its continued instability poses significant challenges for wider stability across the region, including its impact on any sort of long-term peace in the Holy Land. So I would say continued attention to the situation in Syria is really important.
What are these conflicts going to do for immigration and migration concerns from that region? I know that we had a previous conversation with Giovanna talking about how the immigration landscape has changed. Do we have any tools for humanitarian resettlement either in the United States or with our partners in Europe or even perhaps South America?
Yeah, it's a very important question. We had a massive wave of migration out of the Middle East in 2015 and 2016 due to not just the conflicts in Syria, but the conflicts in Iraq and other parts of the region. And as a result, we saw a significant rise in right-wing populism in Europe in response to that wave of migration. That has created, frankly, a situation where Europe is less inclined right now to take in more refugees than they have been in the past. Simultaneously, here in the United States, we're not taking anyone. Our refugee resettlement system is essentially frozen right now. We're really not accepting anyone except for, I guess, white South Africans.
I did see that, white South Africans. Okay.
So it is unclear as to who we're willing to take in and under what conditions. Certainly in the past, the US government has recognized that very specific communities or countries are not safe and have given, for example, the Syrian community who've arrived here temporary protected status. And there's quite a number of communities from the Middle East who have temporary protected status here and continue to require temporary protected status. And it is unclear whether their temporary protected status will be extended by the current administration or not, which is really concerning. Additionally, there have been conversations or, let's say, moments where this current administration says that they have an interest in supporting religious freedom and religious minorities in the region. But then when you look at their refugee and migration and immigration policies, they don't actually line up with supporting those very same communities that supposedly they are concerned about. So in order for there to be any sort of holistic support to any of those communities, you would need the US refugee resettlement system to be unfrozen and go back to doing the work that it normally does.
Are you aware of any ELCA solidarity trips? When is your next planned activity to the region?
So I will be heading to the region at the end of this month with our colleagues at Sumud, in part to engage with our companion church, the ELCJHL, and to hear and see from them all of the concerns and considerations that they're facing right now. It's been a while since I've been to either Israel or Palestine, so I'm really anxious to get back out there and engage directly with people on the ground because their voices are just the number one priority in terms of how we think about what we should be doing.
Sasha, on the humanitarian side, we haven't had a chance to talk about Gaza. What is your understanding of the situation on the ground, with the understanding that today is May 12th and things can change in an instant?
Sure. In terms of Gaza right now, there has been a complete blockade of all humanitarian access into Gaza since March 2nd. And we are at the point now where the UN's warehouses are out of food. All the humanitarian aid agencies that are working on the ground in Gaza are out of food. They are out of medical supplies. There's miles of trucks lined up at the various border crossings waiting to get in with humanitarian aid. All the humanitarian aid is there. It is sitting outside the borders of Gaza. It is not being allowed in by the Israeli government as of now. There have been numerous advocacy attempts and pushes across the board to try and convince the Israelis that they need to at least allow humanitarian aid in, and that has not been successful thus far. On top of that, the medical health, like the healthcare situation inside Gaza is extremely critical. And on Palm Sunday, for reasons unbeknownst to anyone, the Israeli government bombed the Al Ahli Arab Hospital, which is one of the last functioning hospitals. It is a hospital that is supported by the Episcopal Church, and that the Augusta Victoria Hospital also supports and has a direct relationship with. And that hospital is in North Gaza City, and with that hospital out of commission, there's essentially little to no functioning hospital system left in the entire Gaza Strip. There are medical points here and there. There are field hospitals, but by and large, there is very little proper critical care available. And we're at the point where we are seeing famine-like conditions inside Gaza right now because of the lack of engagement by the U.S. government on this issue and the fact that USAID has been dismantled. Normally, we would have metrics from USAID that are in line with like specific metrics about whether we've reached a stage of famine or not. Like, we don't know, but everything that we hear anecdotally from the ground is that we are at famine-like conditions across most of the Gaza Strip. So that's 2 million people staring down a man-made famine.
I don't even know how to question that. I don't even know how to fathom that. What has the ELCA said or done in response to those facts on the ground?
In our various coalitions, we are working to try and, again, raise our voices and say this cannot continue. But we have been raising our voices about the humanitarian situation in Gaza for the last 18 months, both with the previous administration and the current administration. We talk with Congress about this issue pretty regularly. We express the fact that we don't think that this situation is in line at all with U.S. government policies, nor is it in line with what we as a church believe in. But more importantly, like, if there's any interest in peace in the Holy Land long term, what does anyone gain from this? Truly, I don't see that this makes Israelis any safer. I don't see that this makes Palestinians any safer. I don't see that this makes the region any more stable. So across the board, I don't think anyone gains anything from this man-made famine and this humanitarian blockade. And I know in my personal capacity, I will continue to raise this issue with every engagement I have with Congress and the current administration, because it is so critical and because it will lead to sort of ripple effects and things down the line that we can't foresee right now, but it will complicate the ability to find a way forward in terms of peace if this continues for much longer. I think if we're not at 70 days of blockade, we're close to it at this point. That's a very long time to go.
How many people are affected by this blockade?
2.2 million people, roughly.
Okay. I don't know what to do with that, Sasha. I don't know where to go. Sasha, given everything that we've discussed this morning, I feel a little silly asking this, but where have you seen the gospel recently in your work?
Having worked in the humanitarian aid space before I arrived to the LCA, I think oftentimes, and especially working as of late in the Middle East region, you feel like you see some of the worst aspects of humanity But simultaneously, you see some of the best aspects of humanity as people are trying so hard to do the right thing under such adverse conditions. And you have to believe at some point that there's goodness inside of everyone. And that goodness is innately there. And that people on every level of society across all communities are trying so hard to help those around them, to help people they don't even know, like cutting across communities to try and do the right thing and help, even at risk to themselves, even at risk to their position in their own respective communities, because sometimes engagement and bridging is not popular or safe to do, but they're doing it anyways because they know it's the right thing to do. And I just see that across the Middle East, all these communities, irrespective of all the pressures upon them and all the things that are happening, they're trying their best to do the right thing. And so I would say, even if one feels a bit cynical, one has to be an optimist and have that belief in the goodness of humanity in order to do this work. And I still believe that. As a way to answer your question, I feel like that innate belief in the goodness of humanity, that's where I see it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Sasha Ghosh-Siminoff, Program Director for Middle East North Africa Policy for the ELCA. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
The approach of accompanying churches across the globe reflects an idea of missions that the ELCA has considered since the early 1990s, when congregations across Latin America began to speak about accompaniment as a biblical hermeneutic. When the ELCA issued its repudiation of the doctrine of discovery in 2016, it attempted to uncover the ways in which practices rooted in colonization had been used by the Church, including within the sphere of global missions. Today, the ELCA describes accompaniment as an act of walking together in solidarity that practices interdependence and mutuality. This is a kind of missions that is rooted in the breaking down of barriers and building up of relationships with people working together as neighbors, recognizing the inherent value, worth, and dignity of all people. The 5 key values of accompaniment include mutuality, inclusivity, vulnerability, empowerment, and sustainability. As such, our mission journey does not end at a fixed point, but involves the transformation that occurs when traveling with companions in Christ. This past March, members of the ELCA Witness and Society team worked with a delegation from the Environmental Education Center of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land to speak with congressional offices and the United States State Department. The testimony of Palestinian Christian environmental advocates was shared, speaking truth to power. This type of advocacy represented accompaniment at its best, where mutual parties join together for the common good. The book of Romans calls us to rejoice with those who rejoice and mourn with those who mourn. And as Christians accompanying others through missions, we can live out our command to love one another, empowered by the grace of God.
Hi everyone, I'm a Palestinian Christian from the Holy Land, Bethlehem, where Jesus Christ was born. Thank you for having me on this podcast, and thank you for letting me share my story and the story of every Palestinian and Palestinian Christian. I was born in 2002 during the curfew of the Second Intifada, and that period of time was very hard on my parents, specifically on my mother, because on the day I was born, she had to wait hours and hours for the ambulance to come and get her and take her to the hospital. Because the ambulance had to take permission from the Israelis in order for them to come and get my mother. So my name actually has a story, and that story is a daily reminder of the struggles that we're facing as Palestinians in our daily lives. My family owns a farm which is located in the southwest of Bethlehem in Area C, which is under the Israeli military control. Following the Oslo Agreement, Palestine was divided into 3 areas. Area A, which is under the Palestinian control, which is less than 13%. Area B, which constitutes the towns and villages that are under Palestinian Authority control. However, they're isolated by Israeli bypass roads connecting settlements together and are used by Israeli settlers. So technically, it is under the Israeli control. And finally, Area C, which is about 60% of Palestinian lands, including Palestinian farms and agricultural lands, and Palestinians in that area are subjected to Israeli military laws. So my family's farm is located in that area, Area C, and it has been under the danger of land confiscation by the Israelis to establish and construct an illegal settlement on our farm. Of the farm's strategic location, which is on a hilltop that is surrounded by 5 illegal settlements, it's favored by Israeli authorities to establish and build settlements to facilitate creeping annexation and natural growth of the settlements. Although we have the legal documentations to prove land ownership and presence for 100 years, and we have been in court for more than 30 years going the legal way. However, the Israeli authorities have introduced pervasive strategies to prevent us from crossing to the land. On several occasions, they have placed roadblocks, military checkpoints, and even physically assaulted family members, and have recently built roads on our property and structures near the edge of our farm, which will later on, constitute an illegal settlement. Also, they have uprooted hundreds of olive trees and fruit trees just 10 days before the harvest. And it was definitely hard for my family, but we stood firm, exercising the Palestinian morale of Sumud, steadfastness, by replanting the double and triple amount of trees uprooted. My family's farm is not only a story of one single Palestinian family. It is the story of every Palestinian farmer. We as Christians, we believe in hope. We believe that there is light at the end of the dark tunnel. We believe in justice. We believe in peace. This is what our Christian faith is based on. However, there is no peace without achieving justice first. This is a long journey to go, but we believe that the Son of Justice will rise again. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast, and thank you for letting me share my story. Have a good day.
This concludes this episode of Here I Pod. If you want to take action today, we currently have an action alert available in our Action Center titled Gaza's Children Need a Permanent Ceasefire. You can find a direct link to that alert in the show notes for this episode. To learn more about the ELCA's efforts in Israel and Palestine, visit elca.org/Sumud. If you want to contact us, you can email us over at elcaadvocacypodcast@elca.org or leave us a voicemail at 866-740-3522. Thank you for listening.